This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so 2 days ago, before we kind of went on a break, this is where we were. We said what a PaaS service really is. So I said that PaaS is nothing but platform as a service, and a very good example for a platform as a service is an Azure web app that runs on a backend plan called App Service Plan out here. And I said App Service Plan is equal to a virtual machine which powers the application, which gives the application the RAM, the processing power, the memory, and etc. And app service plans are also called as server farm. These are also called as server farm. So in Microsoft terminology, we call them as server farms. And what did we do is that we also went ahead and said that you don't have to basically go ahead and install and maintain all the softwares. You don't have to install the IIS server. The web app by default comes with one, and you just have to select a couple of things like what is the region, what is the operating system, and what is something called as a runtime stack. And we went ahead and created an app service the other day. So we went ahead and we just created an application service, and as and when we created an app service, we have a couple of things right now. We have an app service plan which is powering this particular application service, and we have the actual app service itself. So we have two things out here. And again, how did we create it? Just to give a quick overview on how did we do that. So we said create a resource, and we said it's a web app that I want to go ahead and create, and we give a name to the application which should be unique. And as and when I give a name, it takes a .azure websites.net, which is a fully qualified domain name of the application. And then I said that, okay, fine, the kind of publishing or the way I want to publish it is by using something called as a code. And I have also said that there is something called as a runtime stack, meaning in order for you to run a code on an application, or in order for you to run a code on a server like an Azure web app, you need a supporting software to it. So in my case, I just selected ASP.NET v3.5, and this is also called, I mean, this is called as runtime. This is called as a runtime. And I went ahead and selected a region, and then there was something very important which is called app service plan as such, wherein we went ahead and we saw the different flavors that are available inside the app service plan. We said there is something called as a dev test, there is something called as a production based plan, wherein each and every plan gives us some kind of capacity in order to deal with, and this is the underlying hardware that powers your application. So this is where we are, guys. So is this okay with you all? Does anyone have any questions before we get started? Anyone, anything? Okay, so as and when I create this application service, or as and when I create this web app, and I say browse, I get a very sample page telling that, hey developers, you are now good to go ahead and let's say deploy your code and etc. This is, or the page that you see right now is the equivalent of IIS page that loads when you install IIS on a virtual machine and hit it. Like meaning, I have a virtual machine out here that is running an IIS server on top of it. So if I take the public IP of this virtual machine, so what I did is that I created this virtual machine, installed IIS on it, exposed the port 80 and etc. And finally, when I hit this server, I get a code in written. So let me try that again. So finally, when I hit this server, we get something known as the IIS page that gets loaded. So let's see this. So when I install a virtual machine, so I believe the port 80 is like blocked there. So that's the reason it's not able to show the IIS page out here. But what I wanted to convey out here is that when we take the virtual machine service and when we put the when we put the IP out here and kind of hit the IP, we get a blue screen page telling that this is IIS web server, right? This is the same page, but in a different modified way, which is just telling you that this application is now ready as a web server. Now, the crucial difference between a virtual machine and an app service out here is that an app service is completely managed. It's a managed service by Microsoft, meaning all the backend, the infrastructure, the patching of the softwares, and etc. All of this is actually taken care by Microsoft. We as a user do not have to do anything. Secondly, it's a pure web server. Now, unlike a virtual machine, which can have a multi-purpose use, meaning a virtual machine can be converted into a web server, it can be converted into a fax server, it can be converted into a DNS server, it can be converted later into a build server, and etc. So, unlike a virtual machine, which is a multi-purpose use, a web application or an Azure web app is only or can only act as something called as a web server. And if you look at this, it says the connection to the site is secure, meaning this is called as SSL, Secure Socket Layer, meaning even this SSL is taken care by Azure. I do not do anything. So all this is taken care by Azure right now. So then let's say I have a sample code. Let's say I'll say download HTML templates and I'll just visit this particular website and I'll just download a sample template out here and let me open this up. So I'll just open this up. So the thing is that if I now basically go ahead and extract this out, I will have a few HTML pages and etc. So I have the HTML page and everything. So all this is the HTML code which is just written by one of the developers and I just went ahead and downloaded it out. Now then, how do I make sure that this HTML code that is sitting on my local laptop? So I have my local laptop and I've downloaded the HTML code there. How do I make sure as let's say a developer or a DevOps engineer, how do I make sure to take this code and to deploy it on top of a web application? So I have a web application that is running in Azure. I have a code that is there in my laptop. So how do I make sure to take this code? Because if it's an application server, then it should help me host my code, right? So how do I take this code and let's say deploy it? on top of an application. So, does anyone have any thoughts on this, guys? Anyone, any thoughts? Just take a random guess, not a problem. There is no right, there is no wrong answer out here. So, what do you think about this? Please, guys, I need some inputs from y'all.
Yeah, domain, sir. I'm not getting regarding the web page, right? Once we click that
Hmm.
web page,
Hmm.
it will hit that domain, right?
Correct, but I have my custom code. I'm not talking about a domain right now. So, I have a custom code. How do I
Mhm.
make sure that the question is that how do I make sure that as and when someone clicks on this domain,
Mhm.
I have that custom code getting, or I have that particular custom code that is getting in written, not a code what Azure is providing me right now.
Yeah, we need to be
Getting the
deployed
question?
in. Yeah, we need to be
Hmm.
deployed in root some code, right? And server we need to be deployed, right? Previously
Hmm.
we
So,
have done, right?
correct. So that was for a virtual machine. So how do we do the same thing? But that's right. So you bring up a very good point. So we do copy our code into, or we did copy our code into something called www root folder, right?
Root code.
When
Yeah,
we're
root.
working, let's say, with an app service. But sorry, when we're working with a virtual machine. But I was able to actually log into the virtual machine. So if I am a user, I'm able to do an RDP into the virtual machine, and then I went ahead and installed this particular thing called IIS, and there is something called inetpub, and there is something called www root, wherein I'm just putting all these things out. But right now I have an issue is that I cannot do an RDP into the app service unlike a virtual machine, because this is something called as an application service. This is managed by Microsoft. I,
Yeah,
as a user, do not have access to the underlying virtual machine service.
we are using WinSCP, right? Previously,
Hmm.
yes. That
Right, so
based on that we
that's
can do
right.
it.
So we were using something called WinSCP, and I just asked you all to go ahead and download this and just do some reading on top of it. As in when you download WinSCP, you open this up. Now this is how it'll look like. This is what WinSCP will tell you, and here it is asking you for something called as a new connection. It says, do you want to log in into your remote server? Do you want to log into, let's say, the web app or a virtual machine as such? So it says there is something called as a host name out here. So how do I find it? So let me go back here into, let's say, the web app, and there is something called as an FTP host name. So this is what I'm actually interested in. So I'll just copy this FTP host name out here. I just paste it. There is something called as a username and password. Now this is asking me for the username and password of the Azure web app. Now, as I said, this is a managed service. There's a backend virtual machine which helps it run, and this virtual machine now I'm calling this as an app service plan, which powers it and everything. But I am not allowed, or I did not create the virtual machine. So I did not anywhere while creation of an Azure web app, I did not specify something called as a username or a password. So I did not specify this anywhere. I did not tell that this is a username or this is a password, etc. I did not specify it anywhere. So how do I get that? Is by using something called as a publishing profile. So what I'll do out here is that I'll say get the publishing profile, and I have a notepad file that's got downloaded. Let me open this out. There are two things that is something that I'm actually interested into. Something known as the username and something known as a user password. These are the two things that I'm actually interested in right now. So what I'll do is I'll just take this username, go into the connection, and I'll say this is the username. Again, go back and I'll grab this password. Just copying the password. So again, how did I get this? I went into something called as get publish profile, and as and when I hit the get publish profile, I have this notepad file that got downloaded, which contains my username and which contains something called as a user password. So after having given this, I'll say, okay, fine, you know what, login. So I am now trying to establish something called as a session with the remote server. And if you look at this, right, it says site and it says www root. The same folder, what we were able to see on the virtual machine. So this is the folder on the virtual machine, which was helping me out in order to publish my code to the world, right? And this is the same folder and it already has a file called hostingstart.html. And since it has this file called hostingstart.html, you are able to see this page. You are able to see this page called hey app developers, your app service now up and running and etc. This is what you are able to see right now. So what if I delete it? So I'll just click on this file and there's an X button here and I'll say remove, and it successfully removed this file. Now if I refresh my application, it says you do not have permission to view this directory because there is actually nothing inside it, and it's just throwing an error message telling that, you know what, I don't understand what you're requesting for because there is nothing inside it. So what I'll do is, using WinSCP, I'll just go into the folder, or I'll just say take the link of this particular folder, and I just did a double click here on this particular bar. So this is the bar where I did a double click. So what I'll do out here is that I'll do a double click here and I'll say give the URL of the website, or let's say give the URL of the folder in which I have downloaded the entire HTML code, and I'll say okay. And it's now showing me all the HTML code out here. What I'm going to do is I'll just copy everything. So I'm just dragging everything, I'm just copying everything, drag and drop into the www root folder. Now this is going to take like about a minute or two, and this is called FTP, file transfer protocol. It's called a file transfer protocol. So this is what I did, called as a service known as an FTP service. So I initiated something called as a file transfer protocol, and I am just copying all the files from my local machine, which I have went ahead and downloaded it out. I made sure to go ahead and just give all the files out here, or just give all the folders out here. So this is what I just did right now. So any questions still here, guys? Any questions, anyone? Is everyone able to follow this out? Does anyone have any questions? Okay, so let's wait for this file transfer protocol to complete. This is going to take about a minute or so. And once this is done, let's understand what's happening, or let's understand what will happen to our application out there. So let's do that. So this will, since there are a couple of files out here, and since this is a network transfer, this is going to take about, right now it's taking somewhere around a minute or so, and it's saying there's more 50 seconds that is left. So let's wait for a couple of more seconds and let's see what happens. So until then, guys, any questions, please let me know. And if someone is not able to follow, please do let me know. I'll make sure to repeat it out. So let's wait for this file transfer to complete. And this is done. So all the files that you had on your local machine now were successfully transferred to the app service in Azure. So what I'll do right now is that I'll again go to my front-end app service and I'll just say refresh the screen. As and when I do it, I am now able to see the entire HTML content that's getting displayed out here. So whatever was the HTML content that I just went ahead and downloaded, I just took all the HTML content and I just deployed it, or I just transferred it to the app service that is actually running on Azure. And this is the result right now. So it is now able to successfully display what my code really is. And it's now able to tell that, okay, fine, I am able to get the HTML content and I'll stream it for you. So when I did a virtual machine service again, and we were working with a virtual machine, we installed the virtual machine, or rather we created the virtual machine, and we decided what are the ports that are required. So we said we need 80, 443, and 3389, which is for RDP. And then we said we'll go ahead and install something called as IIS, a feature called IIS, which will help the web app convert into a web server. Then we copied all our files into the www root folder. This is what we did when we were working with a service called as a virtual machine. But when I am now working with a service called as an app service or an Azure web app, I didn't do all of these things. Port, the IIS installation, all these were taken care by Microsoft. I just made sure to copy all my files into the www root folder. This is the only thing that I did. And I did it using something called as an FTP protocol. This is what I did till now. That's it. So, which means that I am not managing the underlying layers. So, when we started our classes, right, we were discussing something called as IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS, wherein we were talking about the three layers basically, or the three-layer model. I am not now managing this underlying layer. All this is my underlying layer. I am not managing this out. I am just managing the app service that is running on Azure. That's it. I am just doing a management of this particular application service. So this is how easy it is to go ahead and interact with a web app. So imagine that I am a hotel industry. So the other day I was talking about the hotel industry and etc. Right? So imagine that I am a hotel industry. I am not interested in opening my port, managing the underlying architecture, patching it, and etc. Because I would now basically want to focus upon my code. My developer just wants to focus upon my code, and I want someone to help me manage all these things. That's where Microsoft comes into picture and says, you know what, I have the perfect service for you, which is called as a PaaS service. And they have given something called as an Azure web app for us in order to kind of deal with this. So any questions still here, guys? Anyone, anything? Any questions? Does anyone have any questions? Okay,
So,
so
yeah, one
yeah,
question.
yeah, please go
So,
ahead, Shiva.
PaaS means,
Hmm?
so being an Azure engineer, but
Mhm.
again, we are responsible to take care of IaaS too, right?
I'm sorry, I didn't get your question.
So you said right. So initially, so before PaaS, we have discussed about IaaS only, right?
Correct, correct.
Now, say for example, some client has took PaaS services.
Hmm.
But again, as an Azure engineer, we are responsible to manage both IaaS and PaaS, right?
So yes, we as an Azure engineers, yes, I mean as a DevOps engineer, we are responsible. But again, let's say you are working for a client who's only working with PaaS. Okay, it's like only working with Azure Web Apps and etc. Let's say you're again helping the same client which has a hotel industry and all that stuff. So in this case, you won't manage the underlying IaaS. This is the underlying IaaS infrastructure I'm talking about. You won't manage this out because you as a user or you as an Azure engineer do not have the direct access to this particular service. You do not have a direct access, but you will be managing this layer. So it depends upon what your project really is, what kind of an offering they are kind of using out, and that accordingly defines what your responsibility really kind of falls out. Does that answer your question, Shiva?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
Any more questions, guys? Okay. So what we did till now is something known as an FTP protocol. So all I did is I was just taking all these files and I was just copying all these files into this particular folder. That's it. I just did this simple thing, not a rocket science, and I am now calling this as an FTP protocol. But now my client says that you know what, my coding standards have improved. I am no longer writing a HTML code. I am not coding in HTML. So no HTML. Rather, I have a development team which has come up with a better way of coding. So they've improved the coding standards and they've come up with a better way of coding. That is by using something called as, let's say, high level languages. Now, HTML is a great language, agreed, not a problem. But when you have multiple things, like let's say a database and let's say a transaction page, HTML won't effectively support it. HTML won't be able to effectively support it. I'm not telling it won't support, but it's not effective when you have database and you have transactions that are going on your applications and etc. That's where high level languages actually come into place, like .NET, Java, Python, Ruby, PHP, whatever that you think of, are something known as high level languages. Now, why am I calling it as high level language and why am I not calling HTML as a high level language? The reason being, a high level language is a human understandable language. Now, I'm going into a bit of coding right now because as a DevOps engineers, right, we need to think like a developer and also basically help the operations team. So I'm just touching the surface of the coding language. I'm not going into the depth. You do not have to understand that. So all these are high level language, and I'm saying high level language is nothing but human understandable, meaning someone like a human being can write with it, can interact with it, and etc. So on and so forth. But if I write a .NET code, I need a laptop to write it, right? So I need a laptop to write my .NET code. So let's diagrammatically do this. So here is where I'm saying that here is where I'm saying that I'm writing something called as a .NET. Let's take the Azure Web outside for a second. And my laptop has an operating system, OS. Now, for my operating system to understand this language, it cannot or it won't be able to interpret this language directly. So it cannot understand high level languages directly. It cannot do this because an operating system can only understand one language, which is called zeros and ones, binary. But I, as a user, I won't be able to understand the binary because it's all 0 and 1. It's all in, let's say, a Greek and Latin language to me. I cannot really interpret this. I cannot really understand this. So there is a gap. So there is right now that you're talking a language and your operating system is talking a language. So there is a gap between these two. And to bridge this gap, right, between the operating system and between my interface, which is a .NET, which is basically a .NET, I need something called as a compiler. So let's imagine that compiler is just going to help you as a language translator between the operating system and your code, which is .NET. This compiler also can be called as something like a runtime. That's where I come into picture or I come to different softwares called SDK, JDK, and etc. Now, SDK is called, or rather, it's an acronym for Software Development Kit. Meaning, this kit, right, will help you interact with the operating system, meaning it will help convert a high level language into a low level language, and it will basically help your operating system to understand the 0 and 1 format. Let's say the 0 and 1 format is not the same for .NET versus Java. Now this will have, like, Java basically has a different way in order to basically make sure to write the binaries. So an SDK or a JDK will help your operating system to understand a language specific binary. Now talking about a language specific binary out here. So I'm now telling that, okay, fine, your SDK or JDK. JDK is called Java Development Kit. These SDKs and JDKs will help your operating system to understand language specific binaries. But I still have a duty to convert it into a binary into a 0 and 1 language, I still have this duty. This is not yet eliminated. So I still need to convert my .NET to something like a 0 and 1, which is where softwares like Visual Studio comes into picture. Now I'm not talking about the Visual Studio code that we have. So Visual Studio Code is something that we were using in order to write our ARM templates and etc. Right? This is not a software I'm talking about. Rather, you have something called Visual Studio, like a full software out here, and this is what I'm actually talking about. Now, this is a very heavy software, guys. So if you have enough space in your computer, I will definitely recommend you all to go ahead and install this out. How do you do that? Is let me give a demo on how to do that. So I am on a virtual machine because I already have the software installed on my local. I won't be able to give an effective demo. So let me open up my virtual machine. Let me open up the Google Chrome browser on the virtual machine. And once you're on Google Chrome, so this is something that you have to do it on your laptop, provided if your laptop has like enough space and RAM. If it doesn't, then you can go ahead and install it on a virtual machine like I'm doing right now. So the choice is up to you all. So I'm just saying download Visual Studio. That's it. This is the only thing that I say. And I get to a website called visualstudio.microsoft.com, the official website from where you can download the software. And the current version of the software is something known as Visual Studio 2022, which is a 2022 version of it. And I'll say there is something known as flavors out here. You have something called community, professional, and enterprise. There are three things out here. Professional and enterprise are paid versions. Community is a free version, and this is good enough for us. And once you download the exe file out here, just go ahead, do a double click on that, and it's telling that okay, fine, Visual Studio installer is like welcoming you, and just say continue, and this says it's downloaded and it's telling it's installing this out. So this is pretty much faster. And once this is done, there is something called as a package selection, meaning what are all the packages that you need with the Visual Studio, along with the Visual Studio. Go back here, and this is how it look like. So if you are installing it, please select the first one, which is called ASP.NET and Web Development. There's something called Azure Development. There's something called .NET Desktop Development. These are the three things I want you all to install, just the three things out here. And this is coming up to 11.11 GB. So it's a big software. And once you select this, so three things out here: ASP.NET Web Development, and Azure Development, and then something known as .NET Desktop Development. Just go ahead and install this out. Now this will take somewhere around 2.5 hours to get installed. And once it's installed, you will be able to see a software, or you will be able to see something like this. In my case, I have all these files open, but in your case, you will have this as blank. It'll just tell, welcome to Visual Studio. And this is how developers will write their code. And this is a pure, or this is, let's say, a very pure development tool out here. Now what I'll say is that just say create a new project out here. And in order to just write a template, in order to just, let's say, get a code so that I can kind of show you all, I'll just type in ASP.NET, and I have various flavors of ASP.NET out here, of which I'll just select the first one, which is called ASP.NET Core Web App, and I'll say next. And it's asking me, can you give a name to your project? I'll say this is first ASP Core Demo. I'll say next. And it's telling, okay, fine, which version of ASP.NET that you want. So I'm just taking the default out here. I'm not doing anything. I'm saying create. So all I'm doing is just taking my code And all I'm doing right now is just creating something out here. So this will take like a minute. So this is now creating something called as a project, meaning this is now creating, or this is now creating the necessary code for you. And in the right hand side of my screen, there is something called Solution Explorer, which will show all the code that you have. Right now, it's telling that, okay, fine, your code is ready right now. Now, this is how developers will go ahead and traditionally write their code. And after writing their code, this is something known, or this is called as a boilerplate code. It's called a boilerplate. It's like a blank ARM template that we, kind of, start with. So on this, a lot of developmental activities will happen. So for now, what I'll do, I'll say there's something called as a folder. There's something known as a folder called as pages out here. I'll just go into this particular folder and I'll say index.cshtml. This is a folder that I want to start interacting with. And it says, welcome to ASP.NET and etc. I'll say great. I'll just delete all these things out. And I'll say this is my sample application. I'll say test. Now done. I'm like, done with my changes. But in reality, developers will do a lot of change out here. And finally, what I will do right now is I'll go here into something called as a first core demo. So this is what I'm just clicking on. I'll just do a right click and I'll say publish. And now it tells, okay, fine, I'll publish the code, but can you tell me what is the target? I'll say my target is Azure. This is what my target really is. And I'll say I have an Azure App Service that is running on Windows. I'll say next. And in my case, I already have an account. In your case, it will first ask you what is your account and etc. It will just ask you where is your account and all that stuff. So I'll do one thing. I'll just use this particular app service called dev website and etc. And I'll say this is the target that I do have, and I'll say finish. And once I do this, it says, okay, fine. I mean, like I'm good to go ahead and publish this code. And what I'll do right now is a very slight modification out here. There's something called configuration, and there's a pencil icon just beside it. I'll say edit, and I'll go into file publish options, and I'll say remove additional files at the destination. So whatever you find additional, just go ahead and remove it out. So this is a best practice, and I'll just hit the publish button. Now it's telling, I'm just checking if your application can run successfully, and it's telling yes, this is good enough. And now there is something called as a, if you look at this message out here, it says build started, meaning I understand that you want to take all this code into a web app that is running on Azure. So first let me convert this code from a high level language to a binary language, and Visual Studio is helping me with that. And finally it said, you know what, I've converted it, and this is what your application will look like, something called as a DLL, or also called zeros and ones binaries. And now if you look at this, it's deleting a lot of files, because I said in the file publish option, remove files at the addition, I mean remove additional files at destination. So it's deleting a lot of files out here right now. And finally, it's adding my code right now to the www root folder out here. So if you look at this, it's targeting something called www root, and it's adding all this code. And it said, you know what, there is the web app got published successfully, build is one succeeded, as etc. And it's starting my application. So this will take, initially for the first time, this will take like a minute or so. And right now my application is being loaded from the cache. So that's the reason you're able to see this right now. And if I open it in an incognito window, you are able to see your first ASP core demo. And this is the change that I did. This is my sample application hyphen test. This is exactly what I did from my local machine, right? So this is exactly what I did from my local machine, which is called first ASP core demo. And I just said this is the sample application, and I said hyphen test. And if I now look at this, I'm able to get the same getting displayed out here. This is how we actually deploy. There is a very rare use case scenario of an FTP protocol. This happens very rarely. This happens in cases while you are dealing with codes like HTML and CSS and so on and so forth, which can be interpreted right away by the server. You do not have to build it, but this code, which is in a high level format, I first need to do a build activity. So if you look at the output, I first did, or the Visual Studio first did a build activity, meaning it converted all the code into a language called binaries or DLL, which can be understood by your server. And then it took all this code and then deployed it or added it to something known as the www root folder. So this is what I did, and finally this is how the output looks like. So any questions until here, guys? Anyone, any questions until here? Is everyone able to follow this, guys? Does anyone have any issues with this? So again, installing the software, this is up to you. It will take some time and it will take a lot of space on your system. If you are in a position to install it, I'll definitely recommend you all to go ahead and install. And for those people who do not have sufficient space or sufficient RAM on your system, you can just use a virtual machine service like I'm doing to install the software out. So all I want you to do is just get a feel on how the software is and how do you work with this particular software. Because at times even the DevOps engineers are asked to kind of work on Visual Studio. So just have a very basic understanding on how Visual Studio works, and that should be good enough. Are we good till here, guys? Any questions that I can take? Okay, so if now for the questions, guys, then I'm good to close. And we will have a class tomorrow and day after, so that I can just adjust for the missing 2 days out here. So we will have a class tomorrow and day after. So I'll see you all tomorrow and we'll discuss more on app services and so on. Thank you, guys. Have a great day ahead.
Yeah. Yeah.